yeah, I should win just because you had the Timberwolves in the 8th seed.
Vasilevsky's been playing really well, and the Lightning have a great offense.
Yeah, it was a tremendous shot, and I've come to expect it from LeBron. I would say I wish the best for the Red Sox, but as a Yankees fan, that's really hard for me to do.
The biggest addition to me is Jalen Brunson.
Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, and that's all I have to say. He's still a top 5 quarterback in this league, and there's nothing really anyone can do about it.
Why'd you have to name him? Like, seriously? Like, thanks, man.
Who would have thought 5 years ago that the Clippers and Nets would be facing in the finals?
How is Joe Burrow going to get the ball to them if his butt is already on the ground?
Crazy. And for the fans at home,
Hello, I'm Cy Mendenhall, and you're listening to Outsiders Opinions with Kevin and Austin.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to our March Madness men's basketball opinions. March Madness is almost there. Make sure you're following us, especially as we get closer to March, especially March 1st and March 2nd, as we will have updates on that. But right now, I don't want to say big three. Let's go the three for college basketball, of course, led by our March Madness expert and then my partner in crime, Austin.
Jake, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. It's been an exciting college basketball year. We've had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of teams going back and forth, a lot of inconsistencies. It's been very, very exciting. I like the crop of teams that have been going on, a lot of great storylines. And I'm really, really, really excited to see what we think about the current state of the college basketball world.
Yeah, I'm currently taking a look as we talk at the ESPN bracketology. It's probably my favorite bracketology to look at. It's probably also the most popular. But yeah, there's been a lot of teams that have been disappointing this year or are starting to peak. Who do you really want to start with?
You talking to me, Jake, or me or Jake? Because
anyone can start.
I'm interested in Auburn, I saw, like, we've been talking about the SEC. Auburn, there are 3 number ones. Is it in the latest bracketology from the SEC? Alabama, Auburn, and Florida are all number ones, and then Duke is the 4th. So I'm curious how y'all feel about that number 1 seed.
I do think it's going to change some by the time that the March Madness tournament comes around. These teams will kind of hurt themselves, if that makes sense. It comes to seeding. I do think that 2 SEC teams will be 1 seeds, but I find it really hard to believe there's going to be 3. Jake?
Yeah, I think the SEC is just a gauntlet. There will be, for there to be 3 number 1 seeds from the SEC would mean that Florida, Alabama, Auburn, and or Tennessee would all kind of have to win out and all make the semifinals of the SEC conference champion or the SEC tournament. I don't see that happening. I could even see Duke moving up to the number 1 overall seed in the tournament because of their path to the ACC championship and the lack of difficulty that they have in conference play. Because tomorrow, don't forget, Auburn has to go to Alabama and play. So Auburn could lose that number 1 overall seed tomorrow. And so it's tough because the SEC is so tough right now for multiple teams to be number 1 seeds and for Auburn just to keep that number 1 overall seed.
Yeah, and I also think it's true, not just with 1 seeds, but with how many SEC teams they currently have in the bracket. They have 14 teams. Bracketology has 14 SEC schools making the tournament right now. I could see the number being as high as 10, maybe 11, but 14 is a crazy number. And again, it's going to come down to the fact that SEC teams are playing each other right now. It's conference play, and they're gonna lose too many games to be a viable tournament team. And I do think some of the teams that are on a bubble, whether in the Mountain West or ACC or Big East, that are maybe not right now in, will have a better chance of getting in after some of these SEC teams that are on the bubble lose.
That's a good point. And kind of, I think it is just surprising. I know we talked about the SEC being so strong, but it is surprising that they are so good. And Austin talking about it going down to 10 from 14. The last 4 in on, as I'm looking at ESPN bracketology, is Arkansas, which they're also something you talked about, Jake, with the transfer portal and just like how that affected college basketball.
Yeah, the transfer portal is really, really interesting to look at now in hindsight, because you got teams that brought in really, really valuable players, like Tennessee with Chaz Lanier, and I don't know, and Alabama with all their a lot of SEC teams brought in a lot of transfer talent, but teams like Kansas and God bless Kentucky brought in a bunch of players. And just seeing the ways in which those teams are currently meshing and or not meshing, a big surprise, a surprisingly struggled team currently. I'm sorry, Austin, is the Arkansas Razorbacks. They brought in all this talent, and it was John Calipari, and yes, they had to rebuild an entire roster from scratch. But they brought in a lot of talented guys from different teams, like Jonas Edu and Janelle Davis, and I mean they brought in freaking Ivisic from Kentucky.
Yeah.
Ivisic followed.
Big Z. You can just call him Big Z.
Yeah, Big Z. Yeah, and to seeing the ways in which that team is not really meshing and how inefficient they are on the floor. A little bit better lately, but just overall struggling. Looking at and in Kansas especially, the ways in which they have struggled in conference play, not being able to mesh as a team, and they have the number 1 transfer portal class, bringing in guys like AJ Storr and Zeke Mayo. And so looking at the ways in which the transfer portal is really effective, bringing in a couple of guys, but bringing in a lot of guys has been ineffective is very interesting.
Yeah, I think just bringing in one guy, I mean, you look at Texas Tech with JT Toppin, he just dropped 40 points against Arizona State in a OT thriller, but sometimes you just need 1-2 guys that can really bolster your team and be leaders, someone that has made a tournament before and obviously has the experience being that top guy on another team can do that for your team this year. But you're right. Seeing a lot of guys transfer in most of the cases, I see the only one that has a lot of transfers this year that's really, really doing well is Kentucky. They still have a lot of transfers from this past season, but a lot of teams are struggling with a lot of transfers, but teams with just 1, 2, 3 guys have really bolstered their rosters and are becoming extremely talented this year.
And kind of talking about teams that have gotten some transfers, and I think they're doing well considering where they were. You have Mizzou, who got Josh Gray, Mark Mitchell, the main 2 guys. I know Jacob Cruz plays for them, but Josh Gray and Mark Mitchell have really been some guys for the Mizzou Tigers. So I'm curious how y'all feel about that team and kind of talking about, they had a lot of people in the transfer portal, but they got a lot of transfers the year prior when they went winless in the SEC.
Yeah, Jake, I think you could talk about them a little bit more than I can. You have a lot more experience with that team more than I do.
Well, yeah, considering I work all of the live broadcasts on television for Mizzou sports, I know a thing or two about Mizzou basketball. Seeing last year's team and just how they weren't going winless in conference play is brutal and terrible. That's the sign of just a terrible, terrible season. But they weren't poorly coached. They weren't getting blown out in all these games. They were playing somewhat decent basketball. They just weren't able to finish in a lot of those games. And they just didn't have the people. And when Kevin mentioned Mark Mitchell, Josh Gray, Jacob Cruz, Tony Perkins, guys who have come in and just been veteran sources of leadership and just veteran presences on this team. You got young guys like Anthony Robinson who are developing very well. Guys like Marcus Allen who are putting up not a lot of minutes, but are very efficient in those minutes. And then retaining guys like Tamar Bates and Caleb Grill, who are really good scorers, but just weren't getting like the attention that they should have been getting. Teams like Missouri brought in a couple guys that fit what they needed. Mizzou needed big men. Mizzou needed rebounding. They're still not a great rebounding team, but they got guys who were at least a step up from what they were doing. And they needed a veteran point guard presence for Anthony Robinson to kind of piggyback off of. And they went and got Tony Perkins. And so seeing Mizzou was a huge surprise this year to see what they were able to accomplish. and seeing the ways in which this team is meshed, the chemistry between the team, the within the team, between the players is really, really impressive. And the program that Dennis Gates is creating, I'm actually fairly impressed. And I wouldn't call myself like a Mizzou fan. I'm just a big college basketball fan. Even though I go to school here, it's Mizzou sports. I never grew up with it. I didn't have a connection to it. It's cool to see him win. But objectively, the program that Dennis Gates is creating over at Missouri is very impressive.
Yeah, they definitely have been an impressive team this year. I definitely did not think that they would be as highly regarded as they are this year. I did not think the turnaround would be this heavy because they are 7-4 in conference after, like you mentioned, going winless last year in conference. That's a massive turnaround. Let's kind of flip things here. The Big East has been very interesting this year. UConn's not even ranked anymore. St. John's is in the top 10. It's been a weird go of things. I know you're a fan of St. John's at least a little bit. You want to kind of talk about the Red Storm?
The Red Storm are fun basketball. The Red Storm are hustle plays, tough defense, jumping on the ball, getting on the floor, crashing the glass. They're just tough and hard-headed, and they play this gritty, aggressive kind of play that is so Patino of him, and it's just it's so perfect, and it's so fun to watch St. John's games. Every game, no matter whether they're home or away, they have this chip on their shoulder all the time. Yet they cannot shoot. It is so interesting. They cannot shoot, and that is scary for March success because you have to be able to shoot and hit key threes in crunch time. They have great players. Kadari Richmond, one of my favorite players to watch at the game, struggles from three. RJ Lewis, great player, scores a lot of points, struggles from three. And so this team that is just so cool and so aggressive with little to no problems except shooting, simply shooting. And this sport requires you to be somewhat decent at shooting. And so I worry about their March success, but just watching them as a team is just so fun.
Yeah, they're extremely feisty team, very Patino. And I think the craziest part is if you don't follow college basketball at all, when we say they're bad at shooting threes, it is historic. I mean, there are 364 D1 basketball teams, and Jake, they're bottom 12. They shoot a putrid 29.2% from three this season on over 20 attempts per game. You're taking almost 21 threes per game and shooting under 29.5%. It is truly remarkable. The only two guys who really can shoot are Davon Smith and Brady Dunlap. Those are the only guys who are attempting at least 3 threes and shooting above 37%. But there's a lot of guys taking a lot of threes and shooting under 30%. Basically, every other player, is shooting under 30%. It's going to be hard to win games with that sort of formula, especially when we're seeing a lot of teams in the SEC, Bama, Kentucky, shoot so well from three. Can you really compete with a team like that? We'll have to see how that works in March, but it's definitely not the normal equation for a team to go far in a tournament.
Yeah, I agree. But the amazing thing about them, though, is that they allow themselves to be able to shoot so poorly from beyond the arc because they create so many opportunities to shoot, because they force so many turnovers. And they don't turn the ball over much. They're very, very polished. And they crash the glass. They create opportunities for themselves. And so, but if they get into March and get to a team play a team that's hard at the right time, because right now they're a projected 5th seed, or they'll probably be a 4 seed, 4 to 6 range. They'll be lucky if they get a 3. That'd be cool. Good for them. And they play one of those, because if they're a 4 through 6 seed, they're playing one of those teams that just came off a run in their conference tournament and just won their conference championship. So they're going to be playing a team that's hot at the right time. If that team has more than 2 or 3 guys who can hit threes consistently, they're going to struggle. That doesn't mean they'll lose. I love this Red Storm team. I love St. John's, but they can't hit threes and they stink at hitting free throws. And so
it makes it hard to come back in games. And also, when you're missing free throws, it gives the other team a chance of coming back. If the other team doesn't turn over the ball and they foul you, well, then they're going to have the opportunity to come back in that game. So St. John's is a very talented team, one of the best defensive and rebounding teams in the nation. But when you supplement that with bad shooting from both the line and the three-point line, it makes it hard to win a lot of games and come March.
And I'm not going to get fooled again. That was the formula. That was the exact situation from Iowa State last year. I knew they were bad at shooting. I knew they weren't a great offensive team, but they were really good defensively. And they didn't end up living up to what I thought they could do. So I'm historically, teams who cannot score and are not good at shooting are not going to win. Historically, this St. John's team seems to have a possible X factor that could make them the outlier. So I'm not going to rule them out, but like Austin said, when we say they are bad at shooting, they are bad at shooting. When it comes to the rest of the Big East, teams like UConn, they're still good. Dan Hurley is still going to have them primed and ready. But teams like Marquette are interesting, who are have 5 really, really efficient starters, but virtually no bench whatsoever. Austin, I want to get your thoughts. What do you think about teams that are really good with their 5 starters, but can't really seem to get a lot of bench productivity?
It either goes one of 2 ways. I either think these teams get into a lot of dogfights early in the tournament and don't make it far, or, we've seen teams with 5, 6 guys in a rotation go far. It's just hard. It's just hard. You know better than me, but if my memory serves me correctly, wasn't the 2022 UNC team very top-heavy, very, 5, 6 man?
Very.
Yeah. So that can work sometimes, but you have to be hitting on all cylinders from all 6 of those players for that to end up working. So it's not what I want to see. I'm not going to discredit a team for doing it, but I do prefer depth. I think depth gives you not only the chance of resting your starters, but also some of those bench players can go off on games and win you tournament games. Maybe players that you didn't really expect to be the reason why you win a game can be. We've seen bench players go off for 15 points in the second half and just take over the game during that span of time, and that would be the reason why you win that game and move on. And if your starters aren't playing well and you have 6 guys you're playing, well, then you're going to lose the game. But if a couple starters aren't playing well and you have an 8 to 9 man rotation, well, you can still just gut out a victory and move on to the next game and then still be alive in the tournament.
I agree. And if we want to look at the current bracketology, this is always subject to change. Marquette is currently a 5 seed that would have to play UC San Diego in the first round. And
UC San Diego's been extremely dangerous this year. I've been taking a peek at them.
They are dangerous. They have 5 guys who average over a steal per game, 2 guys that average over 2 steals per game. And if we look at Marquette, this was from about a week ago in my spreadsheet. Marquette shoots 33% from 3 and rebounds at 33.5 per game. They're good at forcing turnovers and not turning the ball over, but when you can't shoot threes, you can't rebound, and you don't have guys on the bench, a hot team like UC San Diego that forces turnovers and can hit threes, with what's this looking like? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 guys that play 20 minutes a game. 6 guys who play 20 minutes a game. It's a recipe for disaster for teams like Marquette. And so I would be very, very careful. We need to keep an eye on Marquette, the way that they're playing. They are a team that needs to be hot at the right time to have March success.
Yeah, and while they're not a team that fouls a lot, Marquette does not foul all that often. But if you have a player that gets 2 fouls in the first 5 minutes of the first half, well, now you're kind of in a bad spot, because if they get another foul, well, then they have over half the fouls you can get before fouling out. And if they foul out, any one of those starters, you're really in a bad spot because you don't have guys that are used to playing those type of crucial minutes at the end of the game. So that's what usually I worry about, not just getting tired or being cold, but also foul trouble. If you have any sort of foul trouble from any of your star players and you don't have bench guys that are used to playing in those do or die moments, that can suffocate your team at the end of games.
So what are the teams that are looking hot? What about Clemson, who upset Duke, was it a week ago, and then had a pretty big win against UNC following that, kind of looking at what teams could do in the conference championships?
They're a senior-led team. They're really old. So I do like that. They're basically their best 5 players are all seniors, which is pretty crazy to me. So you know that this is their last ride for the majority of the players. And if you want to talk about they're a very good free throw shooting team, they're a very good 3-point shooting team. This is kind of the opposite of the teams we talked about recently. But unfortunately, this is a team that does foul a lot. So it's going to come down to discipline and being able to shoot not only free throws but also 3-pointers, which they can do very well. And being a senior-led team, they should be able to keep their tempers in check.
Yeah, this is another case of let's see how the transfer portal pans out. Victor Lakin and guys like Jaden Zachary, who came from different places. Zachary came from Boston College, I believe. He's a very good defensive guard. Clemson is a weird one for me. It's like Austin said, they're good at shooting. They are efficient from the line. They're pretty good. They're like an average rebounding team. I worry about their defense. They don't force a lot of turnovers. And like Austin said, they do foul a lot. And I worry about situations like, yes, they just beat Duke a week ago. But I don't know if you remember 4 days prior to that, they went into triple overtime at home against Georgia Tech and lost. And they looked terrible. Now, granted, I'll extend an olive branch. They didn't have Victor Lakin for a lot of the end of that game. But the other guys weren't able to get it done.
Well, a big part of that Georgia Tech game, sorry to interrupt, but I remember watching this game. Georgia Tech shot 12 of 25 from free throw. From free throw. How do you lose to a team that shoots under 50% from free throw? I don't know how that happened. I mean, it was just a crazy game. And the reason why, if you're wondering why, is because Georgia Tech had 3 players with over 10 rebounds. They had 52 rebounds, including 20 offensive rebounds. I mean, that just tells you a perfect way to beat Clemson. Get on the boards, and I guess you only need to hit 48% of your free throws to beat them. But it was a wild game, and that's definitely yes, they beat Duke, but also that's a terrible way to lose a game is against a team that's shooting 48% from the line.
And Clemson's going to go up in the rankings. They are. They have no ranked matchups the rest of the season. They have 6 games. They play no ranked teams. They do have to go to Florida State and to SMU. Those aren't cupcakes, but a team like Clemson should beat them. They're going to go up in the rankings. And a team that struggles to rebound in important situations is never, ever going to find more success. Ever. And so that game could be an outlier. I don't want to overreact. They did, not days later, beat Duke at home. But they didn't force a lot of turnovers in that game. The only thing that they really did was keep Duke off the glass. So the story with Clemson is rebounding. When they win, they rebound. When they rebound well, they win. When they don't, they lose. And depending on whether they have a good rebounding team against them versus a bad rebounding team against them, I think is going to be the determining factor.
And then, like I said before, fouls. I mean, Victor Lakin fouled out in 16 minutes against Georgia Tech. 16 minutes he fouled out. That's just not what you want from your primary big man. And then they also had another guy foul out. He played 38 minutes, so it's It's more about how long the game was. But the foul out in 16 minutes against Georgia Tech, that's very, very concerning, especially because that's part of the reason why they lost the rebounding battle is when your big man fouls out. Well, now we have no one to get rebounds, and Georgia Tech just decided to punish them on the glass.
And Chase Hunter is a streaky guy. I love Chase Hunter. He is very, very streaky. He scores a lot of points, but he's sometimes efficient and sometimes he's not. So this Clemson team is a huge anomaly, and I don't know what to think about him yet. And they're going to shoot up the rankings. I know this for certain. Like, unless they crumble in the second half of the season, they're currently a 7 seed. I could see them going up to a 5 or a 4 by the end of the season. They got to show out in the conference tournament. But there are a lot of teams like Clemson out there, like Illinois. Semi-decent, pretty good at shooting, pretty good at rebounding, streaky. Don't know what you're going to get from them on a day-to-day basis. And so those teams are dangerous because Illinois was like that last year. They were up and down on defense, up and down on offense, and their offense clicked at the right time in March. So did Clemson last year. And so I would be hesitant to pick them to make another run again, both of them, either of those teams, back-to-back years. I like the program that Clemson has over there. I like their players, but that is one of the more matchup-based picks for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Any other teams y'all want to talk about before we head out for this episode?
Yeah, I would like to talk about some of the top teams like Duke and Iowa State. I want to know, Austin, what do you think about the state of Iowa State currently? I want to know what you think. What are they looking like?
Well, ever since they've gotten some of their players back from injury, it's looked a little bit more promising. They've won the last 2 games in pretty dominant fashion against TCU and UCF. But before that, it was scary. They had lost 3 games before that, all by a sizable margin, all by at least 10 points. So that's not something you want to see. But I still like them as a team. I mean, when you look at them, they're still top 16 in the country in steals. They force a lot of steals. And they've been much better on offense this year than they were last year, which is definitely something that you wanted to see after last year being that was part of the reason why they lost to Illinois, because they just could not score enough points to keep up with a dominant offensive team. They have 5 players scoring 10-plus points. That's something you want to see. And they do have a couple of guys that can shoot the ball. And they've gotten some players back that can as well. So what are your thoughts on Iowa State?
As much as I want to love Iowa State, I love the Cyclones. I can't when Curtis Jones coming off the bench is your leading scorer. I love Curtis Jones, it's interesting this strategy they have going on, pulling him off the bench. But outside of the 6 guys that can score for him, nobody else can score for them. Like, you got Jefferson and Jackson on the interior getting the boards. Good. I like that duo they got down there. But neither of them can stretch the floor, which is okay. You don't have to have guys that can stretch the floor. But it's bad when you don't have guys that can stretch the floor when your 2 guards, Keyshawn Gilbert and Tamin Lipsey, both shoot 31% from 3. Curtis Jones and Momcilovic are your only efficient 3-point shooters and are pretty much carrying your meager 34% from 3. You take one of those guys out of the equation and their 3-point percentage plummets. And so I'm really, really concerned about their shooting. They do score a lot better than they did last year, but they're also shooting worse than they did last year from 3. Their guards are. And as much as I love them as players, I love Lipsey and Gilbert. I love their aggressiveness. I love their defense. They don't look good. They don't look good right now. And losing, like you said, 3 straight to Arizona, Kansas State, and Kansas by each double digits is not a good look. And I need to see more from the 3-point line. You can't play UCF, their most recent game, and have Momcilovic go 1 of 5 from 3, and Lipsy go 1 of 6 from 3, and Jones go 2 of 9 from 3. It's not going to work. And until I start seeing them hit some threes, I'm not going to go all in on Iowa State.
Yeah, and if you look back at the first game that Momcilovic came back, that was against TCU. It was funny because they shot well from 3. They shot 47% as a team. But 9 of 13 was Momcilovic and Curtis Jones. They did not hit a single 3. They went 0 of 6 besides those 2 players. So even when they're shooting well, the rest of the team is not. So you make a good point regarding that. It's going to be, can those guys stay healthy the rest of the season? And also, can some of the other guards start shooting better from 3? So, yeah, I do think that they I still like them as a team, though. I mean, I like defensive teams that can score, and they have been able to do that better this year. But you're right, that if they needed a big 3 and either some guys have fouled out or have gotten hurt, they're not really going to get them from any of the other guys besides the 2 that we've already mentioned.
Yeah. And one more team I want to talk about is Duke. I want to raise some concerns, but I also want to give some praise. One, Duke has impressed me. Duke is playing way better than I thought they were going to do. I always loved Cooper Flagg. I thought people were kind of overreacting a little bit earlier in the season when he was inefficient. He was a little inefficient, causing a lot of turnovers. Or he was turning the ball over a lot. But he has cleaned that up a lot since then. I want to know, how do we gauge freshman-led teams like Duke historically in March, because it hasn't been good? And do we think Duke is a team that could be an outlier?
When you have a talent like Cooper Flagg, I think it is different because some of the other freshman-led teams like Kentucky last year, like Rob Dillingham's a great player in college, and they've had some other freshmen as well, but they didn't have a Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg's that kind of X-factor player like a Zion or even RJ Barrett, who were both on that Duke team back in 2019, that can kind of stick out and be that different. But I will say I also they have Tyrese Proctor and they have other guys that are somewhat older. But yeah, you're right. They are mostly freshman-led, but Cooper Flagg's just been remarkable this season. I mean, he's almost averaging 20 points. He's shooting 37% from 3. They're a great shooting team, top 40 in the nation. And when your freshman is this good, he's not – yes, the experience can definitely hurt. And while I still have my doubts regarding them going really far, I mean, we've seen Duke be led recently by a freshman in Paolo Banchero. Paolo Banchero was a freshman and basically led them all the way to the Final Four as their best player by far. And so I do think that you can't be all freshmen, and they're not. They have, like I said, they have Proctor, they have James, and while yes, they're majority freshmen, Flagg can bolster this team into a level that most freshmen can't. If it was 3 freshmen as your leading scorers and you still had some good guys below them, but they weren't a Cooper Flagg level, I'd have my doubts, and that's usually why I have my doubts about teams in the past being young. But Cooper Flagg is a generational prospect. And so seeing him on your team, you're definitely more excited about it than you were a normal young team. So I have my reservations about picking freshmen to go really, really far, but I have to remember that, again, Banchero did it in 2022, not that long ago. So if you are a number 1 level prospect, it can happen.
I agree. This is, like I said, they've surprised me this year. They don't have a lot of guys with high scoring numbers, but they still average over 80 points per game because they're a very efficiently run offense. And Cooper Flagg is just that guy. We were talked about Paolo Banchero 3 years ago, and 2 years ago, the number 1 overall seed was Alabama with led by a guy named Brandon Miller. And Austin, you had your concerns about that Alabama team, and you ended up being correct. And so
It's
how
more
do
because
you gauge?
Brandon Miller was not a two-way leader. Cooper Flagg is not just their best offensive player, but their best defensive player. And I think that's really the difference. Because Brandon Miller shot historically bad. And I could definitely see that was going to be something that happened. When Cooper Flagg, the drop in play by a player against good teams is always less on defense than it is on offense. You can be locked up and be bad mentally and shoot 3 for 19. But even on Cooper Flagg's worst day, he's a top 20 defender in college basketball right now. On his worst day. So he can still bolster the team when he's playing bad. That's not the same with Brandon Miller, in my opinion, especially with a Bama team that was already not good on defense. They needed Brandon Miller to be an historically good offensive player like he was during the regular season, which he was not. I can see Flagg playing bad in the tournament offensively during those first couple games against good opponents, but I can't see him play bad defensively, and that's really the difference.
I agree. I completely agree. And Duke has shown no signs of stopping. They went into a tough environment in Clemson. Clemson's not a chump team, and kept it close. Kept it very, very close. And Cooper Flagg didn't have his best day, but Tyrese Proctor was able to lead the way with 23 points. And so they have multiple guys who can still lift up the team. And Con Knipple's a great player as well. And so what did they do after losing Clemson? They bounced back and beat California by 20. And so we mentioned Clemson having an easy schedule the rest of the year. Duke plays Stanford, Virginia, Miami, Florida State, Wake Forest, and North Carolina. It's not easy, but it's also not SEC level. They do play this random Illinois game, apparently, on February 22nd, which is going to be a very interesting game to watch. But this Duke team is primed and ready to be a number 1 seed and possibly make a run.
All right. That looks like that's what we have for today's episode. We appreciate you listening. Make sure you're following us, especially this March, as we'll be going even more in depth for the tournament and then, of course, conference tournaments as well. So make sure you're following us. Make sure you hit that bell, subscribe, get notifications, and thank you for listening to Outsiders Opinions.